Greetings, traveler. You've arrived at a place where time slows down, and the worries of the day begin to fade. Here, we gather to listen to history told not in haste, but in a gentle rhythm meant to calm the mind. Perhaps you're ready to drift into sleep, or perhaps you simply wish for quiet company tonight. Either way, I'm so glad you're here. Tell me, where are you listening from, and what time of day accompanies your journey back through the ages? And if you find these soft retellings of the past comforting, a simple tap on subscribe ensures you'll never miss another night's tale. Now, breathe deeply, rest easily, and let us step into the stories waiting just beyond the veil of memory. Tonight, we travel to a place where the very concept of night and day first took on the weight of ritual, where the boundary between waking and sleeping became a threshold crossed with intention and care. We journey to ancient Mesopotamia, to the land between two rivers, where civilization first learned to mark the passage of time not merely as something that happened to people, but as something people could shape, honor, and sanctify. Here, in the cradle of human culture, the simple act of preparing for sleep became something more, a dance between the mortal and the divine, a negotiation with darkness, a prayer whispered into the gathering dusk. Imagine, if you will, the sun descending over the flat plains of Sumer, its light turning the waters of the Euphrates into molten copper. The year is somewhere around 2,800 years before our common era, though such numbers would have meant nothing to the people who inhabited this world. They measured time differently, in seasons of planting and harvest, in the rising and falling of river waters, in the movements of celestial bodies across the dome of heaven. The day's heat, which had pressed down upon the earth like a physical weight, begins at last to lift. Farmers returning from the fields feel the first stirrings of cooler air, that blessed relief that comes when the sun no longer rules the sky with such ferocity. In the city of Ur, in the city of Uruk, in Lagash and Nippur and countless smaller settlements scattered across the alluvial plain, families begin their preparations for the night. This is not a casual transition, this movement from day to night. It is structured, deliberate, layered with meanings that reach back into the mists of time before written records, back to when humans first gathered in communities and wondered what dwelt in the darkness beyond their fires. The Mesopotamians understood something we have perhaps forgotten in our electrically illuminated world. That night was not merely the absence of day, but a realm unto itself, populated by its own powers, requiring its own modes of engagement. Let us enter one such home, a dwelling in the city of Ur during the height of the Third Dynasty, when this ancient city served as the capital of a vast empire. The house is built of mud brick, those humble building blocks that formed the substance of nearly all Mesopotamian architecture. These are not the dramatic stone temples of Egypt or the marble monuments of Greece that would come thousands of years later. These are structures made from the earth itself, from the river silt mixed with straw and shaped by human hands, dried under that same relentless sun that now begins its nightly departure. The walls are thick, designed to hold the coolness of night through the heat of day, to offer sanctuary from both extremes. The family living in this house consists of a merchant named Ur-Nama, not the famous king of that name, but an ordinary man who happens to share it, his wife Ninshubur, their 3 children, and Ur-Nama's elderly mother. As the light begins to fade, Ninshubur moves through the courtyard at the center of their home, lighting small oil lamps. These lamps are simple things, just clay vessels filled with sesame oil, with twisted flax wicks that produce a warm, flickering light. The oil itself carries a subtle, nutty fragrance that mingles with the cooling air. This act of lighting lamps is not merely practical. It is the first gesture in a choreography of evening rituals that will unfold over the next several hours. As she lights each lamp, Ninshubur murmurs a brief prayer to Nusku, the god of fire and light. The words are ancient, passed down through generations, worn smooth by countless repetitions. She learned them from her mother, who learned them from her mother before her, and so on back through a chain of women extending into the unknowable past. The prayer is not elaborate, just a few lines asking Nusku to protect the household through the hours of darkness, to keep malevolent spirits at bay, to ensure that the dawn will indeed come again. In a world without the certainty we take for granted, where disease could strike without warning and violence lurk just beyond the city walls, such prayers were not mere superstition but necessary insurance against the precariousness of existence. The lighting of lamps serves a dual purpose. Yes, it provides practical illumination, allowing the family to navigate their home as darkness deepens. But more importantly, it creates a boundary, a circle of light that defines human space in opposition to the gathering darkness beyond. The Mesopotamians believed that demons and evil spirits moved more freely at night, that the boundaries between the world of the living and the realm of the dead grew thin when the sun withdrew its protective presence. Light, therefore, was not just helpful, it was apotropaic, meaning it actively warded off evil. The very presence of flame declared, "Here is human space, here is order, here chaos shall not enter." Unwind returns from the marketplace where he has spent the day negotiating the price of copper ingots brought up from the south. He carries the dust of the city streets on his feet and the weariness of commerce in his shoulders. At the threshold of his home, he pauses. He does not simply walk through the doorway. Instead, he stops and pours a small libation of water onto the ground, just outside the entrance. This is an offering to the spirits of his ancestors, those who came before and who still, in the Mesopotamian understanding, take an active interest in the affairs of their descendants. The water seeps into the dry earth, and Unwind whispers the names of his father and his father's father, acknowledging their presence, seeking their continued protection and favor. Only after this brief ceremony does he cross the threshold, stepping from the public world of the city into the private sanctuary of his home. And even this act of crossing holds meaning. The threshold itself is a liminal space, a boundary between outside and inside, between the dangerous world and the protected space. Mesopotamian homes often featured small plaques buried beneath these thresholds, inscribed with protective spells and images of guardian demons. Fierce figures whose very ugliness was meant to frighten away any evil entity that might attempt to enter. The people of Mesopotamia understood that boundaries matter, that the places where one realm meets another are charged with particular power and require particular attention. Inside, the household gathers in the central courtyard as the last light drains from the sky. The children have been called in from their play in the narrow streets outside. They come reluctantly, as children always do when asked to leave their games, but they come nonetheless, drawn by the smell of the evening meal and by the rhythms they have always known. The eldest daughter, Eliama, whose name means, "My God is Mother," carries a clay doll she has been playing with, a simple figure with a painted face and no legs, designed to sit rather than stand. The younger children cluster around their grandmother, who sits on a low stool, her hands moving constantly as she spins wool, her fingers knowing the work so intimately that they require no light to continue their task. The evening meal is a modest affair by our standards, but ample by theirs. There is barley bread, still warm from baking, dense and hearty with a slightly sour tang from the natural fermentation of the grain. There is a thick pottage of lentils and onions, flavored with coriander and cumin, spices that grew in the gardens tended by Neen Shubar and other women of the neighborhood. There are dates, those precious fruits that grow in clusters on the palm trees that line the irrigation canals, sweet as honey and just as valued. And there is beer, the universal drink of Mesopotamia, consumed by all ages, brewed by women in every household, thick and nutritious, drunk through straws to filter out the bits of barley that float on its surface. Before the meal begins, Unwind stands and raises a cup of beer in offering. He pours a small amount onto the ground, another libation, and speaks the name of the family's personal god. Every Mesopotamian household had such a deity, a personal protector who served as an intermediary between the family and the great gods who ruled the cosmos. This personal god received daily offerings and prayers, and in return provided protection, prosperity, and advocacy before the divine assembly. The relationship was transactional, yes, but also deeply personal, almost familial. The personal God was imagined as a kind of divine patron, invested in the family's welfare, disappointed by their failures, pleased by their successes. As they eat, the conversation flows in the easy rhythm of a family at the end of a day. Nama speaks of the price of copper, of the merchants from Dilmun who have arrived with strange goods and stranger stories. Shubur mentions that the neighbor's daughter is to be married next month, that preparations are already underway. The grandmother tells a story about when she was young, about a flood year when the waters rose so high they threatened even the great ziggurat, about how everyone in the city came together to reinforce the levees, working through the night by torchlight. The children listen with half an ear, more interested in the dates they're allowed to eat and in the bits of bread they sneak to the household dog, a scruffy creature of indeterminate breeding who lies in the doorway, alert to any sound from the street beyond. When the meal is finished, there is no rush to clear away the dishes, no urgency to move to the next activity. Time, in this world, has a different quality than it does in ours. There are no clocks ticking away the seconds, no schedules to keep, no appointments made for specific times. Time is measured instead by the position of the sun, by the call to prayer from the temple, by the natural rhythms of hunger and fatigue. And so the family lingers, allowing the food to settle, allowing the transition from day to night to unfold at its own pace. As full darkness settles over the city, the sounds of change. The daytime cacophony of the marketplace fades. The cries of vendors, the arguments of customers, the bleating of goats and the braying of donkeys. In its place comes a different soundscape, one of greater quiet but not of silence. From the great ziggurat at the city's heart comes the sound of evening prayers, the voices of priests raised in hymns to Nana, the moon god who is Uar's patron deity. These songs drift across the rooftops, weaving through the narrow streets, entering homes through windows and doorways. Even those not participating directly in the temple rituals pause to listen, for these songs are part of the city's identity, part of what it means to be a citizen of Uar. The moon itself, slowly rising in the eastern sky, is not merely a celestial body in the Mesopotamian worldview. Nana, whom the later Akkadians will call Sin, is a living presence, a god whose movements across the heavens mark the passage of the month, whose phases determine the religious calendar, whose light is a tangible blessing upon the earth. When the moon is full and bright, it is a time of celebration and thanksgiving. When the moon is dark, during those few nights each month when it cannot be seen, it is a time of anxiety and increased protective rituals, for the god himself is understood to be in danger, traveling through the underworld, vulnerable to the forces of chaos that always threaten to overwhelm order. Shubur now begins the more intimate evening rituals, those specifically concerned with preparing the household for sleep. She moves through the rooms. For this is a prosperous house with several separate chambers opening off the central courtyard, and checks that all is secure. She ensures that the grain stores are properly sealed against mice and rats. She verifies that the beer jars are covered, both to keep insects out and to prevent the beer god from departing the house in displeasure. She examines the seals on the storeroom where Nama keeps his most valuable goods, the copper and the wool and the fine textiles he trades. These seals are small cylinders of stone carved with intricate designs. When rolled across wet clay, they leave an impression that serves as both lock and signature, a guarantee that the contents have not been disturbed. But beyond these practical concerns, Shubur is also checking the spiritual integrity of the home. She examines the small shrines that stand in alcoves throughout the house, miniature temples dedicated to various protective deities and to the family's ancestors. Each shrine contains a small clay figurine, crudely made but invested with tremendous meaning. Some of these figures represent gods, others represent departed family members. All receive daily offerings of food and drink, and in return, they are expected to watch over the household, to warn of danger, to intercede with the greater powers on the family's behalf. At each shrine, Neen Shubra pauses and whispers a brief prayer. She checks that the offering bowls contain fresh water, for water is life in this desert land, and to offer it is to offer the most precious substance on earth. She ensures that a few grains of barley or a small piece of bread sits before each figurine, for the dead must eat just as the living do, and a hungry ghost is a dangerous ghost, liable to cause mischief or worse. These offerings are not large. The family cannot afford to feed the dead as generously as they feed the living. But they are consistent, given every day without fail, for consistency is what builds relationship, what maintains the covenant between the living and the dead. The children, meanwhile, are being prepared for bed by their grandmother. This preparation involves several stages, each with its own significance. First, they must wash, and this washing is not merely about physical cleanliness, though that is certainly part of it. In Mesopotamian thought, the transition from day to night, from waking to sleeping, involves a kind of purification. The concerns and contaminations of the day must be washed away before one can safely enter the vulnerable state of sleep. And so each child in turn has their hands and feet and face washed with water drawn from the household cistern, water that has settled during the day so that any sediment has sunk to the bottom, leaving the water clear and cool. As she washes them, the grandmother murmurs protective formulas, short spells designed to ward off the demons and evil spirits that might trouble their sleep. There is a particular class of demon called the Lilu, night demons who especially prey upon children, causing nightmares, illness, and disturbed sleep. To protect against these entities, the grandmother invokes various protective deities. She calls upon Pazuzu, the demon king of the wind, whose face is so terrible that even other demons flee from him. Though Pazuzu himself is a fearsome being, the Mesopotamians recognized that sometimes the best protection against evil is a greater, controlled evil, a fierce guardian who will fight on one's behalf. The children know these rituals so well they could perform them in their sleep. They recite the protective prayers along with their grandmother, their young voices mingling with her ancient one. These are prayers they will carry with them throughout their lives, prayers they will someday teach to their own children and grandchildren. In this way, the words travel through time, an unbroken chain of protection passed from generation to generation, each repetition reinforcing the power of the spell, each voice adding to the chorus of all those who have spoken these words before. Once washed, the children are given a light snack, perhaps a few more dates or a small cup of milk if the family's goat has been generous in her production. This snack serves both a practical and a ritual purpose. Practically, it helps ensure that the children will not wake in the middle of the night with hunger pangs. But ritually, it is one more way of satisfying and placating the needs of the body before committing oneself to the uncertain realm of sleep. The Mesopotamians understood that many of the disturbances we experience in sleep, the dreams, the nightmares, the sudden wakings, have their root in bodily discomfort. A body that is clean, fed, and comfortable is a body better prepared to rest peacefully through the night. The sleeping arrangements in a Mesopotamian home vary depending on the season and the wealth of the family. During the hottest months, which stretched from late spring through early autumn, many families slept on the roof of their homes, where any breeze could reach them and where the heat retained by the thick mud brick walls during the day could not disturb their rest. But now, in the cooler months, the family sleeps indoors, in rooms designed specifically for this purpose. These sleeping chambers are small and windowless, which helps maintain warmth when the desert night turns cold, as it often does even after the most scorching of days. The beds themselves are not like our modern beds. Most people slept on woven reed mats laid directly on the floor, perhaps with a thin wool blanket to cover themselves. The more prosperous, like Unwind family, might have actual bed frames, simple constructions of wood lashed together with leather thongs, with more elaborate woven matting stretched across to form a sleeping surface. Such beds were raised off the floor, which provided some protection against scorpions and other creatures that might wander through the house during the night. Pillows as we know them did not exist, but a person might use a folded cloak or a small leather cushion filled with wool to support their head. Before the children lie down to sleep, their grandmother performs one more ritual. She takes a small clay tablet, no larger than her palm, inscribed with a protective incantation. This tablet has been specially prepared by a priest at the temple, commissioned by the family and paid for with a portion of their barley stores. The incantation written upon it is ancient and powerful, calling upon a host of protective deities to guard the sleeper through the night. The grandmother passes this tablet over each child's body, starting at the head and moving down to the feet, while reciting the words inscribed upon it. This act is understood to create an invisible barrier around the child, a shield that malevolent forces cannot penetrate. The incantation speaks of building a wall of fire around the sleeper, of setting guardian demons at the four corners of the sleeping mat, of calling upon the personal god to stand watch through the hours of darkness. It invokes the names of deities both great and small: Marduk, the champion of the gods; Shamash, the sun god who sees all things; Ishtar, the fierce goddess of love and war, and a dozen others whose names carry power. Each name is a nail driven into the protective structure, each invocation a strengthening of the barrier between the vulnerable sleeper and the dangers of the night. When the children are finally settled on their sleeping mats, when they have been covered with light woolen blankets and kissed on the forehead and blessed one last time, when their breathing has begun to slow and deepen into the rhythm of approaching sleep, only then does the grandmother return to the courtyard where Nin Shubur and Yuarnama still sit in the lamplight. The adults have their own preparations to make, their own rituals to observe before they can surrender themselves to sleep. For adults, the bedtime rituals are both simpler and more complex than those for children. Simpler because adults do not require the same level of oversight and care that children do. More complex because adults carry a greater burden of responsibility and are more aware of the genuine dangers that lurk in the darkness. An adult understands that the prayers and incantations are not just comforting stories but necessary protections against real threats, both physical and spiritual. Nin Shubur and Yuarnama sit together for a time, speaking in low voices about the day that has passed and the day to come. This conversation, this sharing of thoughts and plans, is itself a kind of ritual, a way of unburdening the mind before sleep. They discuss practical matters: what needs to be purchased in the market, what repairs the house requires, what offerings should be made at the upcoming festival. But they also share their worries and their hopes, the things that weigh on their hearts and the dreams they hold for their children's futures. In this way, they divide the burden between them, so that neither must carry it alone through the night. When at last they rise to seek their own bed, they perform a final circuit of the house together. They check once more that all doors are securely barred, that all valuable items are locked away, that the fire in the courtyard oven has been safely banked for the night, not extinguished completely but reduced to embers that can easily be rekindled in the morning. They ensure that the small offering bowl at their personal god's shrine has been refilled, and Yuarnama adds an extra date to the offering, for there has been a particular anxiety weighing on him lately, a business deal that has not concluded as he hoped, and he seeks additional favor from his divine patron. They wash themselves as their children did earlier, hands and feet and face, washing away the dust and sweat of the day. This washing is done from a large ceramic basin kept in their sleeping chamber, the water poured from a pitcher by one spouse for the other, an act of mutual care and service. The water catches the lamplight as it falls, creating momentary sparkles in the dimness, and when it splashes into the basin, the sound is soft and soothing, one of the day's last gentle noises before the house settles into the deeper quiet of night. Before lying down, they stand together before a small household altar tucked into a niche in the wall of their sleeping chamber. This altar is more elaborate than the simple shrine scattered throughout the rest of the house. It contains figurines of multiple deities, carefully arranged according to hierarchy and relationship. At the center stands a representation of their personal god, a figure molded from clay and painted with great care. On either side are figurines representing other deities to whom the family has particular devotion, perhaps Shamash the sun god, who oversees justice and contracts, important to Yuarnama in his work as a merchant, perhaps Gula, the goddess of healing, to whom Ninshubur prays for the health of her children and her aging mother-in-law. Before this altar, the couple recites their evening prayers, the long prayers reserved for adult petitioners, prayers that cover every aspect of their lives and the lives of those they love. They pray for protection through the night, yes, but also for prosperity in their business dealings, for the health of their family, for the fertility of their garden, for the continued favor of the king and the city governor, for peace in the land so that the trade routes remain open and safe. They pray for their children's futures, that their sons will be successful in their own trades and that their daughter will make a good marriage. They pray for the memory of their dead, that those who have gone before might rest peacefully in the underworld and not be tormented by hunger or thirst or abandonment. These prayers are long, longer than those offered at any other time of day, for the night is when humans are most vulnerable, when the protective presence of the sun god Shamash is withdrawn, when the forces of chaos and disorder have their greatest power. The prayers are also deeply personal, spoken softly so that even their own children in the next room cannot hear the specific requests and concerns being laid before the divine. There is an understanding that one's most private fears and hopes should be shared only with the gods, who already know them anyway but who appreciate the act of articulation, the vulnerability of the petitioner who speaks their truth. When the prayers are finished, Ninshubur performs one final act before she can rest. She takes a small amulet from a box kept near the altar, a protective charm made of baked clay inscribed with powerful symbols and words. This amulet has been blessed by a priest and is imbued, she believes, with real protective power. She ties this amulet around her neck with a flax cord, feeling its slight weight settle against her chest. She wears this amulet every night without fail, for it is her personal shield against the demons of nightmare and illness that particularly target women. There is a whole class of texts in Mesopotamian literature devoted to the protection of women during the night, reflecting an understanding that women faced particular vulnerabilities, whether from complications of childbearing, from demons believed to target female fertility, or from the very real dangers of a patriarchal society where women had limited legal recourse. The amulet Ninshubur wears is inscribed with a formula specifically designed to ward off Lamashtu, one of the most feared demons in the Mesopotamian pantheon. Lamashtu is described as having the head of a lion, the teeth of a donkey, naked breasts, and a hairy body. She is known to snatch babies from their mother's breasts, to cause miscarriages, to bring fever and nightmares. The incantation on Ninshubur's amulet calls upon 7 different gods to protect against Lamashtu, to drive her back to the mountains where she belongs, to prevent her from crossing the threshold of this house. Yuarnama has his own protective amulet, though his concerns are different. His amulet is designed to protect against the Alu demon, a creature without mouth or ears or face, one of the class of demons that bring nightmares and sleep paralysis, that sit upon the chest of the sleeper and steal their breath. His amulet invokes Marduk specifically, for Marduk is the great demon fighter, the god who defeated Tiamat the chaos monster and brought order to the cosmos. If any deity can keep the Alu at bay, it is Marduk. Finally, with all preparations complete, with all rituals observed and all prayers spoken, the couple lies down on their bed. The lamp is not extinguished entirely, that would be to invite too much darkness into the sleeping chamber, but is reduced to the smallest flame, just enough to push back the absolute blackness but not so much as to disturb sleep with its brightness. In this gentle gloom, they arrange themselves on their sleeping mat, their bodies finding the familiar positions they have occupied for all the years of their marriage. Sleep does not come immediately, as it rarely does for adults burdened with the responsibilities of household and livelihood. Ninshubur lies on her side, listening to the nighttime sounds of the city. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, and another answers. From several houses away comes the sound of a baby crying, the thin wail cutting through the night air. From the temple comes the last prayer song of the evening, a hymn to Nana asking the moon god to travel safely through the night sky and to bring the dawn once more. These sounds are familiar, reassuring in their ordinariness. They speak of a living city, of other families also settling into sleep, of a community sharing the nightly journey into darkness and vulnerability. Nama's thoughts circle around his business concerns. Tomorrow he must return to the marketplace to conclude the copper transaction. The merchant from Dilmun has been difficult to negotiate with, asking a price that Nama considers too high, yet if he does not purchase the copper, one of his competitors surely will, and then where will his own trade relationships stand? He reviews in his mind the arguments he will make, the price he will offer, the concessions he is willing to grant and those he is not. But eventually, these thoughts too begin to slow and fragment, to lose their sharp edges, to drift into the formless territory that lies between waking and sleeping. In the room where the children sleep, the youngest has awakened briefly, disturbed by some small discomfort or perhaps by a dream half-remembered. He calls out softly for his mother, not quite crying but close to it, and the grandmother, who sleeps in the same room to watch over them, is there immediately, shushing him gently, adjusting his blanket, whispering the same protective formula she whispered earlier. Within moments, the child has sunk back into sleep, whatever fear or discomfort that briefly surfaced now smoothed away by his grandmother's familiar presence and soothing words. Throughout the city of in thousands of homes large and small, similar scenes are unfolding. The wealthy merchant in his fine house near the temple district performs rituals more elaborate than Nama's, with more deities to appease and more possessions to protect. The poor laborer in his tiny dwelling at the city's edge offers simpler prayers, for he has little to give the gods but his sincerity and his need. The priests in their quarters near the great ziggurat observe the most complex evening rituals of all, for they mediate between the human and divine realms and must maintain their purity with constant vigilance. Even the king, in his palace, performs his own bedtime rituals, though his are concerned not just with personal protection but with the well-being of the entire city, for the king is understood to stand in a special relationship with the gods, responsible for maintaining cosmic order through his proper performance of ritual. As the night deepens, as more and more of the city's inhabitants surrender to sleep, a different kind of watchfulness begins. On the walls of the city, guards patrol through the hours of darkness, their torches creating moving points of light against the black sky. These guards are not just watching for human enemies, though that is certainly part of their duty. They are also keeping vigil against the less tangible threats that emerge after sunset, the demons and spirits and wandering ghosts that might seek entry to the city if the proper vigilance is not maintained. The guards carry not just weapons but also amulets and recite protective spells they have learned for this purpose. They understand that they stand at another kind of threshold, the boundary between the ordered space of the city and the chaotic wilderness beyond, and that this position requires both physical and spiritual strength. In the great temple of Nana, the priests maintain their own vigil through the night. The temple never truly sleeps, for the gods must be tended at all hours. Every few hours through the night, priests enter the innermost sanctuary where the cult statue of Nana resides, and they perform abbreviated versions of the daily rituals, offering food and drink, burning incense, singing hymns. The god must be honored constantly, his needs must be met, his presence must be acknowledged, for the god's favor is what protects the city and ensures its prosperity. A neglected god is an angry god, and an angry god can withdraw protection, can allow enemies to prevail, can permit drought or flood or plague to afflict his people. But even as these watchful activities continue at the margins, the guards on the walls, the priests in the temple, the city as a whole has entered a state of rest. The narrow streets, so crowded during the day that one must constantly step aside to make way for donkeys laden with goods or for sedan chairs carrying the wealthy, are now empty and silent. The marketplaces where vendors shouted their wares and customers haggled over prices are now bare, the temporary stalls dismantled and stored away. The workshops where potters shaped clay and metalworkers hammered copper and weavers worked their looms are now dark and still, the tools of industry laid aside until the dawn. This nightly rest is not just a biological necessity but a fundamental rhythm of the cosmos as the Mesopotamians understood it. Just as the gods rested after the work of creation, just as even divine beings required periods of repose and renewal, so too did humans and human communities need to withdraw periodically from the busy work of life into a state of quietude and restoration. Sleep was understood as a gift from the gods, a temporary death that allowed the body to heal itself and the spirit to replenish its strength. But it was also understood as a dangerous passage, a journey into a realm where the normal rules did not apply, where anything might happen. Dreams, which came during sleep, were taken very seriously in Mesopotamian culture. They were understood as messages from the divine realm, as warnings or promises, as glimpses into future events or revelations of hidden truths. The interpretation of dreams was a specialized skill, and professional dream interpreters could be consulted for a fee, men and women trained in the elaborate symbolic language through which the gods communicated via nocturnal visions. There were even texts, what we might call dream interpretation manuals, that listed various dream images and their meanings, allowing a person to decode the messages they received while sleeping. But not all dreams were messages from the gods. Some were sent by demons specifically to terrify and disturb the sleeper. Others were simply the meaningless wanderings of a mind unmoored from waking consciousness. The challenge was discerning which dreams mattered and which could be dismissed. This is one reason why the protective rituals performed before sleep were so important. They were meant to create a kind of filter, allowing only beneficial or necessary dreams to reach the sleeper while blocking those sent with malicious intent. Neen Shuber, now hovering in that liminal space between waking and sleep, experiences a dream beginning to form in her consciousness. She sees herself walking along the bank of the Euphrates, but the river is different somehow, its waters higher than they should be, moving faster. She feels a sense of urgency, a need to reach some destination, but she cannot quite identify what that destination is. There is someone with her in the dream, a figure she recognizes but cannot quite see clearly. The figure speaks to her, but the words are muffled, unclear, as if spoken from underwater. She strains to hear, to understand, but the effort pulls her back toward wakefulness, and the dream fragments and dissolves before it can fully form. She opens her eyes briefly, disoriented, the dream already fading from memory. The lamp still burns with its small flame, casting familiar shadows on the walls. She can hear Yuarnama breathing deeply beside her, already fully asleep, and from the children's room comes no sound at all, which means they too are resting peacefully. She closes her eyes again and allows herself to sink back into the darkness, and this time sleep claims her fully, pulling her down into its depths. In that depth, in that darkness, her consciousness continues to move through landscapes both familiar and strange. She dreams of her childhood home, of her mother teaching her to spin wool, the spindle dropping and spinning in an endless rhythm. She dreams of the day she was married, of the ceremony in the temple, of the fear and excitement mingled together. She dreams of the births of her children, each one different, each one bringing its own pain and joy and transformation. These dreams are not messages from gods but the mind's own work, processing and integrating the experiences of life, finding patterns and meanings, creating narrative from the chaos of lived experience. For Yuarnama, sleep brings different visions. He dreams of the marketplace, but in his dream, the marketplace extends forever, stretching to the horizon and beyond, and he is searching for something, moving from stall to stall, asking questions no one seems able to answer. Then the scene shifts and he is in a boat on a river, but it is not the Euphrates, it is some other water, dark and still, and he is being carried somewhere he does not want to go. He tries to steer the boat back, tries to paddle against the current, but his efforts make no difference. The boat continues on its course, and he feels a growing sense of dread, though he cannot identify what he fears. This dream, if he remembers it in the morning, might prompt him to visit a dream interpreter, or at least to make an extra offering to his personal god. A dream of being carried by water to an unknown destination can signify many things: a journey, a change in fortune, or depending on other factors in the dream, even approaching death. But dream interpretation is a complex art, and context matters. The same image can mean different things for different different circumstances. What is threatening for one dreamer might be promising for another. The youngest child, whose name is Lugobanda, named after an ancient hero king of Uruk, also dreams. His dreams have the vivid, illogical quality of childhood dreaming, where the boundaries between reality and imagination are even more permeable than they are for adults. He dreams of flying over the city, looking down at the streets and houses from high above, like a bird. He can see the great ziggurat rising from the center of the city, its mud brick walls painted in different colors, blue and red and white, creating horizontal bands that seem to float in space. He flies toward it, and as he approaches, the ziggurat begins to grow, or perhaps he is shrinking, and soon each individual brick is as large as a house, and he is flying between them, through passages that shouldn't exist, into spaces that open into other spaces that couldn't possibly fit within the structure's physical dimensions. Then he is no longer flying but standing in a vast chamber lit by torches, and there is a figure seated on a throne, massive and terrible and beautiful all at once. He knows, with the certainty one has in dreams, that this is Nana himself, the moon god, and he feels no fear, only wonder. The god speaks to him, but the words are not words as he knows them. They are more like music, like the feeling of music if it could be understood directly without passing through the ears. He wakes briefly, his heart beating fast with the strangeness of it all, but his grandmother is there, her hand on his shoulder, and she whispers something he cannot quite hear, and he sinks back into sleep, and the dream changes into something else, something gentler, a memory of playing with his siblings in the courtyard, the sun warm on his face. Throughout the city, thousands upon thousands of individual consciousnesses are having their own nocturnal experiences, their own dreams and visions, their own journeys through the landscape of sleep. Some sleep peacefully, their rituals having successfully created the conditions for restful slumber. Others toss and turn, troubled by dreams they cannot escape, by anxieties that will not release their hold even in unconsciousness. Some wake repeatedly through the night, disturbed by physical discomfort or by noises from the street or by the crying of infants. Some sleep so deeply that they seem almost to die, their breathing barely perceptible, their bodies so still they might be carved from stone. The moon travels across the sky, marking the passage of hours in its steady arc. The Mesopotamians divided the night into 3 watches, and different rituals and observations marked the transition from one watch to the next. During the first watch, immediately after sunset, the city gradually settled into sleep. During the second watch, the deep middle of the night, sleep reigned most completely, and the city fell into its deepest quiet. During the third watch, the hours just before dawn, the city began its gradual awakening, as those with early work to do, bakers and farmers and temple priests, stirred and began their preparations for the new day. But we are still in the second watch now, in that deepest part of night when even the dogs have ceased their barking and the last lamps in the last wakeful houses have been extinguished or allowed to burn down to nothing. This is the hour when demons are understood to be most powerful, when the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead is thinnest, when strange things can happen that would be impossible in the light of day. There are stories told in Mesopotamia of people who have encountered ghosts during these deep hours, spirits of the dead who have somehow escaped from the underworld and wander the streets of the living. These ghosts are pitiable creatures, hungry and thirsty, desperate for the offerings that the living have failed to provide. They might appear to a late-night traveler, blocking their path, demanding food, or drink or simply recognition. Or they might enter houses where the protective rituals have been inadequately performed, where some threshold has been left unguarded, and they might trouble the sleep of those within, bringing nightmares or illness or simply a pervasive sense of unease. This is why the evening rituals matter so much. They are not mere habit or superstition but practical measures taken against real dangers. Whether we modern listeners believe in demons and ghosts or not, the people of ancient Mesopotamia certainly did, and they organized their lives around this belief. Their rituals were technologies, methods developed over countless generations for managing the dangers of existence. Some of these rituals addressed physical dangers, ensuring the house was locked, checking that fire was safely contained, making sure children were accounted for. Other rituals addressed spiritual dangers, placating gods and ghosts, warding off demons, maintaining the invisible shields that protected the vulnerable human community from the forces of chaos. In one house not far from Unwind's home, a family is dealing with a crisis that has disrupted their evening rituals. Their youngest daughter, a girl of perhaps 7 years, has been sick for 3 days now with a fever that will not break. She lies on her sleeping mat, her small body radiating heat, her sleep disturbed by vivid, troubling dreams from which she wakes crying out. Her mother sits beside her through the night, bathing her forehead with cool water, whispering prayers, performing again and again the protective gestures that should ward off the illness demon that has clearly taken up residence in her daughter's body. Earlier in the day, the family consulted with an Asipo, a priest who specialized in healing and exorcism. The Asipo examined the girl, asked questions about when the illness began and what symptoms she displayed, consulted his tablets of medical and magical knowledge, and determined that she was afflicted by a particular fever demon known to target children. He performed an elaborate ritual involving the sacrifice of a small animal, the recitation of lengthy incantations, and the creation of a figurine that represented the demon. This figurine was then ritually destroyed, broken into pieces and thrown into the river, carrying the demon away with it. The Asipo assured the family that the demon would depart, that the fever would break, that the girl would recover. But the fever has not yet broken, and the mother's faith wavers as she sits in the lamplight watching her daughter's labored breathing. She has done everything she is supposed to do. She has made offerings to all the appropriate gods. She has performed every protective ritual she knows. She has paid the Asipo and followed his instructions precisely. And still her daughter suffers. In her exhaustion and fear, dark thoughts begin to creep in. Has she somehow offended a deity without realizing it? Has she neglected some crucial offering or broken some taboo? Is this illness a punishment for some fault of hers, some sin she cannot even identify? These thoughts are not unusual. The Mesopotamian worldview included a strong element of what we might call cosmic justice, the belief that suffering and misfortune were generally the result of having somehow displeased the gods. If a person was prosperous and healthy, it was evidence of divine favor. If a person suffered illness or loss, it suggested divine displeasure. This created a certain psychological burden, for every misfortune became not just a practical problem to be solved but also a theological mystery to be unraveled. What have I done wrong? Which god have I offended? How can I make amends? The mother, whose name is Ningal, decides to perform one more ritual, even though the hour is late and she is desperately tired. She takes a small clay bowl and fills it with water from the household cistern. She adds to this water a pinch of salt, for salt has purifying properties, and a few drops of oil, for oil carries prayers upward to the divine realm. She stirs the water 3 times in a clockwise direction while reciting a prayer to Gula, the great goddess of healing, whose symbol is the dog and whose knowledge encompasses all illnesses and their cures. Then she dips her fingers in the water and touches them to her daughter's forehead, her throat, her chest, and her abdomen, marking the places where the demon might be hiding, where the fever burns hottest. Gula, great physician, wise goddess, healer of all who suffer, she whispers, drive out this demon that afflicts my daughter. Restore her to health. She is innocent, She has done no wrong. If there is fault, let it be mine. Take from me whatever you require, but spare my child." This prayer, this offer to substitute herself for her daughter, comes from the deepest place of maternal love, that willingness to bear any burden if it means one's child can be spared. The girl stirs under her mother's touch, her eyelids fluttering but not quite opening. Her breathing seems perhaps slightly easier, or maybe that is just wishful thinking on the mother's part. Ningal continues her vigil, continues her prayers, continues bathing her daughter's fevered skin with cool water. She will not sleep this night, cannot sleep while her child suffers. And so she sits, one more wakeful soul in a city mostly given over to slumber, holding watch against the darkness and against the demon that has invaded her daughter's body. In another part of the city, in the quarter where the craftsmen live, a different kind of vigil is being kept. An old man lies dying, surrounded by his family. His sons and daughters have been called to his bedside, and they sit in the lamplight watching as his breathing becomes more and more shallow, as the life force gradually withdraws from his failing body. This man, whose name is Shulgi, has lived a long life by the standards of his time, perhaps 60 years or more, and he has been a good man, a skilled potter whose work was known throughout the city, a faithful worshipper of the gods, a generous head of household. Now he is making the final transition, the one from which there is no return. His family has already begun the preparations for his death, for they can see that he will not last much longer. His eldest son has been to the temple to make arrangements for the funeral offerings. His wife has begun gathering the grave goods that will be buried with him. Some of his favorite tools, a few small vessels of food and beer to sustain him on his journey to the underworld, a clay figurine to serve him in the afterlife. These preparations are not morbid but practical, expressions of love and duty toward one who is departing. The Mesopotamian concept of the afterlife was not particularly optimistic. The underworld, called Kala or Kor, was understood as a dark, dreary place where the dead existed as pale shadows of their former selves, sustained by the offerings brought by the living but never truly living again as they once did. There was no heaven in the Mesopotamian cosmology, no place of eternal reward for the righteous. Rich and poor, good and evil, all went to the same place when they died, all became the same ghostly inhabitants of the land of no return. What mattered, then, was to be properly buried with the appropriate rituals, to have one's name remembered and spoken by the living, to receive regular offerings of food and water so that one did not suffer hunger and thirst in the afterlife. The worst fate was to die without family, to be denied proper burial, to be forgotten by the living, for then one became one of those pitiful, hungry ghosts who wandered the earth causing mischief and harm in their desperate need for sustenance. Old Shulgi has no such fear. He is surrounded by family who love him and who will perform all the necessary rituals. His name will be spoken in offerings. His grandchildren will learn his story and pass it on to their children. He will join the community of ancestors who watch over this household, who are invoked in prayers, who remain woven into the fabric of family life even after death. In this way, he will achieve what immortality is available to mortals. Not eternal life, but eternal memory, eternal presence in the ongoing story of his people. As his breathing becomes more labored, his wife, herself an old woman now, bent with years and work, leans close to his ear and speaks to him. She tells him not to be afraid, that she will make sure he receives all the proper offerings, that she will speak his name every day. She tells him that he has been a good husband, a good father, that he has lived a life worthy of honor. She tells him that when her own time comes, she will join him in the underworld, and they will be together again. These are the last words he hears in this life, this reassurance and this promise, and then with one final shallow breath, he departs. The moment of death is met not with weeping, that will come later, but with a specific ritual. The eldest son, who has been watching for this moment, immediately stands and tears a strip of cloth from his garment. This is the first of many ritual acts that will mark the period of mourning. The women in the family begin a low wailing, a keening that will continue intermittently for days. Someone goes to wake the neighbors, for death is not a private matter but a community concern, and the neighbors will be expected to participate in the mourning rituals and eventually in the funeral feast. But all of this happens outside the scope of our current concern, which is the night and its rituals. What is relevant here is how death intersects with the daily rhythm of bedtime observances. In a house where someone has died, normal sleep becomes impossible. The dead body must be watched through the night, both out of respect and for practical reasons, to ensure that no animal disturbs it, to keep away any evil spirits that might be drawn to the moment of death, to begin the process of preparing the body for burial. Family members take turns keeping this vigil, sitting beside the body, reciting prayers, making offerings to ease the deceased's journey to the underworld. This death watch is understood as one of the most sacred duties of family membership. To leave a body unwatched would be a profound dishonor, a betrayal of the most fundamental obligations. And so even though they are exhausted, even though grief weighs heavily upon them, Shulgi's family maintains their vigil, sitting with him through this first night of his journey to the land from which no traveler returns. Meanwhile, in the palace at the center of the city, the king, whose name in this era is Ibisin, though his reign will not end well and his name will later be associated with the collapse of the UR3 dynasty, is engaged in his own elaborate bedtime rituals. The king's evening observances are vastly more complex than those of ordinary citizens, for the king stands in a special relationship with the divine. He is understood to be the representative of the gods on earth, the intermediary between heaven and the human community, responsible for maintaining cosmic order through his proper performance of ritual. The king's bedchamber is located in the most secure part of the palace, accessible only through a series of guarded rooms. The bed itself is an elaborate construction, with a frame of precious cedar wood imported from the mountains to the north, with inlays of ivory and lapis lazuli, with fine linen sheets woven by the most skilled weavers in the land. But for all its luxury, the bed is understood primarily as a ritual space, a place where the king, in his sleep, might receive divine messages, might travel to the realm of the gods, might be visited by deities with instructions or warnings. Before the king can retire, his personal priests must perform a series of protective rituals. They burn incense, real incense, not just pleasant-smelling herbs but expensive resins imported from far away, substances known to be particularly pleasing to the gods. They recite lengthy incantations calling upon all the major deities to protect the king through the night, for any harm that comes to the king is understood as harm to the entire kingdom. They place protective amulets at the four corners of the bed, each one inscribed with powerful words and symbols. They sprinkle the bedchamber with holy water drawn from the sacred precinct of the temple, water that has been blessed by the high priest himself. The king must also undergo a ritual purification before sleep, more thorough than that performed by ordinary citizens. He is washed by temple servants using water mixed with aromatic oils. His hair and beard are combed and perfumed. He is dressed in a special sleeping garment made of the finest linen, pure white and ritually clean. Only when all these preparations are complete can he finally lie down, and even then, a priest remains in the room with him through the night, sitting in wakeful meditation, ready to record any dreams the king might experience, for a royal dream is automatically understood as a divine message of importance to the entire kingdom. Tonight, King Ibisin lies awake longer than usual, troubled by thoughts he cannot quite articulate. There have been disturbing reports from the northern borders, rumors of movements among the highland tribes, whispers of a people called the Amorites who are pressing down from the northwest. There have been poor harvests in some regions, leading to increased demands on the royal granaries. There have been omens. The birth of a two-headed lamb, an unusual pattern in the flight of birds, the appearance of a comet, all of which the diviners have interpreted in vague and unsettling ways. The king knows that his grandfather and his father before him ruled over a vast and powerful empire, stretching from the Gulf to the mountains, united under the divine authority of Nana of UR. But he also knows, though he barely admits it even to himself, that this power has begun to fray at the edges, that the great accomplishment of unification is proving difficult to maintain, that forces of disintegration are at work. He has performed all the proper rituals. He has made all the prescribed offerings. He has maintained justice in the land, or at least he has tried to. And yet he feels the gods withdrawing their favor, feels the tides of history beginning to turn against him. These thoughts are too troubling to hold for long, and eventually he forces them away, turning his mind instead to prayers, to the familiar words that have been spoken by kings before him stretching back to the very beginning of the dynasty. He prays to Nana for wisdom and strength. He prays to Enlil, the king of the gods, for continued authority. He prays to Inanna for victory over his enemies. The words are ancient and powerful, and they bring him some measure of comfort. Eventually, holding these sacred syllables in his mind like a shield against his fears, he drifts into a troubled sleep. His sleep this night will bring dreams, though whether they are true messages from the divine or simply the product of his own anxious mind, even he will not be able to say with certainty. He dreams of standing atop the great ziggurat, looking out over the city and the plain beyond. The sun is setting, but it sets wrongly, sinking in the north instead of the west, and the sky turns not orange and pink but a sickly green. He sees a wind rising, a sandstorm sweeping across the plain, burying everything in its path. He tries to call out a warning, but his voice makes no sound. He tries to run down from the ziggurat to help his people, but his legs will not move. He is frozen in place, forced to watch as the storm engulfs the city, covering the houses and the temples, swallowing the streets, until only the very top of the ziggurat where he stands remains above the sand. Then the scene shifts, as it does in dreams, and he is no longer atop the ziggurat but in some kind of vast throne room, larger than any that exists in the physical world. Seated on thrones around him are figures of terrible majesty, and he knows these are the great gods themselves, the assembly of heaven. They are debating something, arguing with great passion, though he cannot make out the specific words. But he understands, with the intuitive knowledge one has in dreams, that they are debating the fate of his kingdom, that his future and the future of his people hangs in the balance, dependent on the outcome of this divine argument. He wants to speak, to plead his case, to defend himself and his rule, but he finds that he cannot. He is present but powerless, able only to witness, not to participate. And then one of the gods, he thinks it might be Enlil, though the figure's face is too bright to look upon directly, stands and makes a pronouncement, and though Ibisin cannot hear the actual words, he feels their weight, their finality, their doom. And he knows, with the terrible certainty of dream knowledge, that something irreversible has been decided, that his fate and the fate of his kingdom has been sealed. He wakes suddenly, his heart pounding, his body covered in cold sweat despite the warmth of the chamber. The priest sitting vigil notices immediately and comes to his side. "A dream, my lord," the priest asks, and Ibisin nods. The priest lights additional lamps and brings writing materials, for the dream must be recorded immediately, while it is still fresh, so that it can be properly interpreted. Haltingly, still shaken by the vividness and emotional power of the dream, the king relates what he saw. The priest writes it all down on a clay tablet, his stylus making small precise marks in the wet clay. When the dream has been fully recorded, the priest promises that first thing in the morning, he will bring this tablet to the chief diviner for interpretation. "Try to rest, my lord," the priest says gently. "The gods often send troubling dreams to test our faith, not to reveal our doom." But Ibisin finds it difficult to follow this advice. He lies back down, but sleep will not come again easily this night. He stares up at the ceiling of his chamber, at the wooden beams barely visible in the lamplight, and he wonders what the gods have decided about him and about his kingdom. In the end, though he cannot know it this night, his dream is indeed prophetic. Within a few years, the Ur-3 empire will collapse under pressure from invading Elamites and Amorites, and Ibbi-Sin himself will be carried off into captivity, a humiliated prisoner, a king who failed to maintain what his ancestors had built. But that future is not yet. Tonight, it is still only possibility, only one potential path among many. Tonight, the empire still stands. The walls of Ur are still strong. The temple rituals are still performed. The gods are still worshipped. And in houses throughout the city, people sleep, mostly unaware of the larger forces of history that are beginning to stir, concerned only with their immediate lives, their families, their daily struggles and small victories. The second watch of the night is passing toward the third now. In some houses, people are beginning to stir, those who have tasks that require an early start. The bakers, for instance, must rise while it is still dark to begin preparing the bread that will be sold in the marketplace later in the morning. The process of making bread takes hours. Mixing the flour and water and fermented starter, kneading the dough, allowing it to rise, shaping the loaves, heating the ovens to the proper temperature, baking. To have fresh bread available when the market opens, one must begin the work in the deep hours of the night. In the bakery of a man named Kuri, the head baker is already awake, moving quietly through his house so as not to disturb his sleeping family. He performs abbreviated versions of the morning rituals. A quick wash, a brief prayer, a small offering to his personal god. He wraps his cloak around himself against the pre-dawn chill, for even in this warm climate, the temperature drops significantly in the hours before sunrise. Then he walks through the silent streets to his bakery, carrying a small lamp to light his way. The streets at this hour are eerie in their emptiness. The bustling thoroughfares of day are now hollow corridors between sleeping buildings. Kuri's footsteps echo against the mud brick walls. Somewhere a cat yowls, the sound carrying far in the stillness. He passes the city night watch, guards stationed at key intersections, and they nod to him in recognition. They know him as a man whose business requires these odd hours. He offers them a greeting, but brief, for it is understood that one should not speak more than necessary during these liminal hours, should not draw the attention of whatever might be listening from the darkness. At his bakery, he unlocks the door, another ritual boundary being crossed, and enters his workspace. He lights additional lamps and sets about preparing the ovens, building up the fires that will be needed to bake the day's bread. Soon his apprentices will arrive, and together they will transform grain into food, will continue the ancient alchemy that sustains human life. But for now, in this quiet moment, it is just him and the fire, and the darkness outside slowly beginning to thin toward dawn. Back in the house of Ur-Nama, the family continues to sleep, though the quality of that sleep is changing as the third watch progresses. Bodies are beginning to anticipate the coming dawn, even though consciousness remains suspended. Breathing patterns change, becoming lighter and more variable. Dreams become more vivid, more easily remembered, for the dreams that come in the hours just before waking are often the ones that stay with us through the day. Ninshuber dreams of a garden, lush and green and impossibly beautiful. She is walking through this garden with someone she knows but cannot quite identify, and they are gathering herbs and flowers. The scents are overwhelming in their richness, lavender and rose and something else she cannot name, something that smells of paradise itself. She feels a profound sense of peace in this dream, a contentment deeper than anything she experiences in her waking life. When she eventually wakes, she will carry this feeling with her for hours, this residue of dream peace coloring her perception of the day. Ur-Nama, having passed through his earlier troubled dreams, now sleeps more deeply, and his dreams have turned to memories. He dreams of his father, dead these 10 years now, and in the dream his father is teaching him to calculate accounts, to use the counting system, to keep records of transactions. His father's voice is so clear, so present, that when Ur-Nama wakes, he will momentarily forget that his father is gone, will turn expecting to see him, and will feel the fresh sting of loss when reality reasserts itself. The children too are dreaming, each in their own private world. The eldest daughter dreams of her doll come to life, walking and talking and becoming a companion. The middle child dreams of food, of a feast spread before him, of eating and never being full. Little Lugalbanda, having passed through his earlier vivid visions, now sleeps a blank and dreamless sleep, the deep rest of early childhood, when the body is growing and requires complete unconsciousness to do its work of building bone and muscle and brain. The grandmother, sleeping lightly as old people often do, wakes several times through the night, her bladder demanding attention, her joints aching in ways they never did when she was young. Each time she wakes, she performs a brief protective ritual, whispering a prayer, checking on the sleeping children, ensuring that all is well. Then she lies back down and wills herself back to sleep, though it comes less easily each time. She is aware, though she does not speak of it, that her own time is drawing closer, that she is entering that final stage of life when one begins to exist as much with the dead as with the living, when the boundary between this world and the next becomes more permeable. But she is not afraid. She has lived a full life, has seen her children grown and her grandchildren born. When her time comes, she will be ready. In the house where young girl lies fevered, the crisis is reaching its peak. The mother, Ningal, still keeping her vigil, notices a change in her daughter. The girl's breathing, which has been rapid and shallow for hours, suddenly becomes slower, deeper. The heat radiating from her small body begins to diminish. Ningal touches her daughter's forehead with trembling fingers and finds it cooler, slightly damp with sweat. The fever is breaking. Relief floods through the mother, so intense it is almost painful. She bows her head and offers a prayer of thanksgiving to Gula, to all the gods, to any power that might be listening. "Thank you," she whispers, over and over. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." The demon has departed, driven out by the combined force of the ritual performed by the Asapa, the mother's own prayers and vigil, and perhaps simply by the body's own healing powers, which the Mesopotamians understood imperfectly but which operated nonetheless. The girl will live. She will recover. The mother can finally, allow herself to sleep, curling up on the sleeping mat beside her daughter, one arm protectively across the small body, sinking into exhausted slumber even as the first hints of dawn begin to lighten the eastern sky. In the house where old Shulgi has died, the family continues their death watch, but with the approach of dawn comes a change in their activities. The women begin washing the body, preparing it for burial. This is done with ritual care, specific prayers accompanying each stage of the washing. The body is clothed in clean garments, the best the family can provide. The grave goods are arranged around it. Soon, when full daylight comes, the burial procession will form, and Shulgi will be carried to the family tomb, a modest underground chamber in the cemetery district of the city, where he will be laid to rest with his ancestors. In the palace, King Ibisin finally falls back into troubled sleep as the third watch advances toward dawn. His priest continues the vigil, watching over the sleeping king, ready to record any further dreams. The clay tablet on which the earlier dream was recorded sits nearby, its surface already beginning to dry and harden, preserving the king's nightmare for future interpretation. That tablet will eventually be filed away in the palace archives, where, thousands of years later, archaeologists will discover it, another fragment of evidence about how these ancient people lived and thought and feared and hoped. Throughout the city, as the third watch progresses, more and more people begin to stir. The temple priests are rising for their pre-dawn rituals. The farmers who live within the city walls but work the fields beyond are waking, preparing for their walk out to the agricultural lands. The shepherds are gathering their flocks, ready to lead them out to pasture once there is enough light to see by. The prostitutes in the tavern district are finally going to sleep, their night's work done. The tavern keepers themselves are cleaning up from the evening before, preparing for another day of business. The transition from night to day is not instantaneous but gradual, and it requires its own rituals, just as the transition from day to night did. As people wake, they perform their morning ablutions, washing face and hands, rinsing the mouth, cleansing away the residue of sleep. They speak morning prayers, thanking the gods for protection through the night, asking for blessing on the day ahead. They break their fast with whatever food is available. Perhaps leftover bread from the evening before, perhaps a handful of dates, perhaps some of yesterday's beer. These simple actions, repeated every morning, serve to reorient the person from the realm of sleep to the realm of waking, from the private world of dreams to the public world of daily labor and social interaction. In Unwind household, the grandmother is the first to wake fully, as she usually is. She lies for a moment in the dim pre-dawn light seeping through the high windows, listening to the breathing of her sleeping grandchildren, allowing herself a few moments of rest before the day's demands begin. Then she rises, her joints protesting, and begins her morning routine. She lights a lamp from the banked coals of last night's fire. She says her morning prayers, her voice a soft murmur in the quiet house. She checks on each of the children, satisfying herself that they have passed safely through another night. She makes her way to the courtyard and begins the process of reviving the cooking fire. She adds fuel carefully, dried dung cakes, which burn hot and relatively clean when properly prepared, and blows gently on the coals until flames begin to lick upward. The fire is not just a practical necessity but a sacred presence in the home, a small manifestation of divine power that must be properly tended and respected. As she works, she speaks to the fire, greeting it, thanking it for its service, asking it to burn steadily and well. One by one, the rest of the family wakes. The children emerge from their room, rubbing their eyes, still half in the dream world. Neen Shubber rises and begins preparing a morning meal. Uarnama performs his morning ablutions and says his prayers, then prepares for another day at the marketplace. The familiar rhythms reassert themselves, the structure of daily life taking shape again after the dissolution of night. But the night has not been without effect. The dreams they have experienced, though already fading from clear memory, have done their work on the unconscious level. The prayers they spoke, the rituals they performed, have reinforced their sense of connection to the divine, their place in the cosmic order. The rest they have taken has restored their bodies and refreshed their minds. They are ready now to face another day, to engage in the work of living, to meet whatever challenges the day might bring. As the sun finally breaks above the horizon, sending its first rays across the flat Mesopotamian plain, the city of Ur fully awakens. The streets begin to fill with people. The marketplace stirs to life. The temples resound with morning hymns. Another cycle has completed and begun again, day to night to day, waking to sleeping to waking, the eternal rhythm that structures human existence. But this rhythm, as we have seen, is not automatic or thoughtless. It is shaped and structured by ritual, by careful attention to the transitions, by recognition that these boundaries between day and night, between waking and sleeping, between life and death, are charged with meaning and power. The bedtime rituals of ancient Mesopotamia were not quaint customs or mere superstitions but sophisticated technologies for managing existence, for creating meaning, for connecting the individual to family, community, cosmos, and divine. These rituals acknowledge that night is dangerous, that sleep is a vulnerable state, that darkness brings real threats both physical and spiritual. But they also provided tools for managing these dangers, for creating protected space, for ensuring that the sleeper could rest without being consumed by anxiety. In performing these rituals, the people of Mesopotamia were saying, "We know the world is dangerous, we know we are vulnerable, but we are not helpless. We have these words, these gestures, these offerings, these divine relationships. We can create order in the face of chaos. We can light lamps against the darkness. We can build walls, both physical and spiritual, between ourselves and what would harm us. And perhaps most importantly, these rituals were communal. They were learned from parents and grandparents, taught to children, shared with neighbors, performed by families together. In a world of much isolation and vulnerability, these shared practices created connection. Everyone in the city was performing similar rituals at similar times, creating a kind of collective protective shield, a communal commitment to mutual survival through the dangerous passage of night. There is something deeply moving about imagining these ancient people, living 4,000 years ago in a world so different from ours yet so similar in its fundamental human concerns. They worried about their children's health, about their business dealings, about the stability of their government, about whether the gods looked favorably upon them. They told stories to make sense of their experiences. They created elaborate systems of meaning to give structure to existence. They loved and feared and hoped and dreamed, just as we do. And every night, as the sun set and darkness gathered, they performed their rituals, their small acts of defiance against chaos, their humble assertions of human agency in a cosmos largely beyond their control. They washed and prayed and made offerings. They checked the locks and lit the lamps and blessed their children. They spoke the names of their dead and sought the protection of their gods. Then they lay down in darkness, trusting that dawn would come, trusting that they would wake to see another day. Sometimes that trust was misplaced. Sometimes children died despite all prayers and protective rituals. Sometimes empires fell despite the king's elaborate observances. Sometimes the gods seemed not to listen, or perhaps they listened and chose not to intervene. The Mesopotamians were not naive about this. Their literature is full of laments about divine silence, about the apparent arbitrariness of fate, about good people suffering and wicked people prospering. They knew that rituals were not guarantees but rather the best tools they had, the accumulated wisdom of countless generations attempting to navigate the uncertainties of existence. Yet they continued to perform these rituals, night after night, generation after generation, because the alternative, to surrender to chaos, to give up the attempt to create meaning and order, was unthinkable. The rituals themselves, regardless of their efficacy in controlling external events, had internal effects that were undeniably real. They provided comfort. They created structure. They reinforced social bonds. They gave people something to do in the face of helplessness, some way to act when action seemed impossible. Consider again the mother sitting vigil beside her fevered child. The protective incantations she whispers, the cool water she presses to her daughter's forehead, the offerings she makes to the goddess Gula. These actions may or may not influence the course of the illness, but they absolutely influence the mother's own emotional state. They give her hope. They allow her to feel that she is doing something rather than nothing. They connect her to a larger narrative about divine care and cosmic order. And in maintaining her vigil, in refusing to abandon her post, she is enacting a love that transcends pragmatic calculation, a commitment to her child that exists independent of outcome. This is true also for the family keeping watch over old Shulgi's body. The death itself cannot be prevented or reversed. No ritual will bring him back to life. But the rituals of mourning and burial serve crucial functions nonetheless. They mark the significance of his passing. They honor his life and his relationships. They help the living begin to process their grief. They ensure that he will be remembered, that his name will continue to be spoken, that his connection to the family persists even across the boundary of death. The rituals don't change what happened, but they profoundly change how the living relate to what happened. And even for those whose night passes peacefully, without crisis or drama, the bedtime rituals serve essential purposes. They create a psychological boundary between the concerns of the day and the rest of the night. They establish a transition space where one can gradually let go of waking consciousness. They provide reassurance through repetition and familiarity. They connect the individual to something larger than themselves, to family tradition, to community practice, to divine order. In our modern world, we have largely lost this ritualized approach to the transition between waking and sleeping. We treat sleep as a purely biological function rather than as a meaningful passage requiring conscious attention. We go to bed whenever we happen to feel tired, often with no ritual marking beyond brushing our teeth. We fall asleep while watching screens, the glow of television or smartphone replacing the oil lamps of antiquity but serving no protective or sacred function. We wake to alarms that jolt us abruptly from sleep into full consciousness with no gradual transition. There is perhaps something we might learn from the Mesopotamians about the value of ritual, about the importance of marking transitions, about treating sleep not as lost time but as a significant part of the human experience deserving its own attention and care. Not that we need to adopt their specific practices. We don't believe in their demons or their gods. We don't face the same physical dangers they faced. Our cosmology is fundamentally different from theirs. But the underlying insight remains valid, that transitions matter, that vulnerability requires care, that meaning must be actively created and maintained. As the dawn fully arrives in ancient Ur on this morning we have been imagining, the city transforms once again. The uncertainty of night gives way to the clarity of day. The fears that seemed so real in darkness diminish in sunlight. The dreams that felt so significant upon waking begin to fade from memory. The cycle continues, as it has for thousands of years, as it will for thousands more, until eventually this city itself will fall into ruin, will be buried beneath the desert sand, will become an object of archaeological curiosity for peoples who do not even know it once existed. But on this morning, Ur is still vital, still thriving, still confident in its permanence. Nama walks to the marketplace with his mind on the copper transaction he must complete. Neen Shubur begins her daily tasks, grinding grain, weaving cloth, tending the garden, preparing food. The children scatter to their various occupations, the older ones to apprenticeships or to school at the temple where they will learn to read and write, the younger ones to play in the streets and courtyards. The grandmother settles into her spinning, her hands moving in the timeless rhythm of that ancient craft, transforming raw wool into thread. In the house where the fevered girl lay close to death just hours ago, the child is sleeping peacefully now, her breathing steady and normal, her skin cool to the touch. The mother, also sleeping after her long vigil, will wake in a few hours with overwhelming gratitude, with renewed faith in the gods who answered her prayers, with a lightness of spirit that comes from having faced a terrible fear and seen it pass. She will make offerings at the temple, generous offerings within her means, as thanksgiving for her daughter's recovery. In the house of mourning, old Shulgi's body has been prepared and laid out, and the family is receiving the visits of neighbors and friends who come to pay their respects and to share in the grief. This communal mourning is itself a ritual, a way of ensuring that no one grieves alone, that the burden of loss is distributed across the community. There will be a funeral feast after the burial, and people will tell stories about Shulgi, will remember his skill as a potter, his generosity, his humor, his place in the web of relationships that makes up the community. In this way, he will be honored and remembered, and his family will know that his life mattered, that he made a mark on the world that will not immediately disappear. At the palace, King Ibisin is meeting with his diviners, recounting his troubling dream, listening to their interpretations. The diviners are careful, diplomatic, reluctant to speak too plainly of doom to the king's face. They speak of the dream as a warning rather than a prophecy, as a call to increased vigilance and piety rather than as an immutable fate. They recommend additional offerings, special rituals, perhaps a purification ceremony for the entire city. The king listens and nods and tries to take comfort from their words, though the unease planted by his dream continues to gnaw at him. He does not know, cannot know, that within a few short years everything he fears will come to pass. The empire will indeed fall. He will indeed be carried off into captivity. The city of Ur itself will be attacked and destroyed, its temples burned, its walls breached, its population killed or enslaved. There will be a famous lament written about the fall of Ur, one of the great poems of Mesopotamian literature, describing in vivid, heartbreaking detail the destruction of the city and its temples, the suffering of its people, the silence of its gods who turned their faces away and allowed catastrophe to unfold. But that is the future, and the future is not yet. Today, this morning, Ur still stands. The walls are still strong. The temple still receives its offerings. The marketplace still bustles with trade. The houses are still occupied by living families going about their daily business. And when evening comes again, as it will, as it always does, the rituals will be performed once more. The lamps will be lit. The children will be washed and blessed. The prayers will be spoken. The offerings will be made. The city will settle into sleep, protected as best as human effort can provide, watched over by whatever powers might still be listening, trusting that dawn will come again. The rituals persist even when empires fall. Long after Ur itself has collapsed, long after its temples are ruins and its royal line is ended, the bedtime practices we have described continue in modified forms in other cities, other eras, other dynasties. The specific gods invoked might change. Nana giving way to other deities as cultural power shifts, but the basic structure remains. The lighting of lamps. The making of offerings. The protective formulas. The prayers for safety through the night. These practices are older than any particular city or empire, and they will outlast them all. When archaeologists excavate the ruins of Mesopotamian cities thousands of years later, they find evidence of these bedtime rituals scattered throughout the domestic spaces. They find small altars in house corners, worn smooth by countless offerings. They find protective amulets buried beneath thresholds. They find clay tablets inscribed with incantations against demons, the same formulas copied and recopied across centuries. They find the small clay lamps that once held oil and flame, that once pushed back darkness, that once marked the boundary between human space and the night beyond. And from these fragments, these broken pieces of pottery and crumbled mud brick, these faded inscriptions and buried amulets, they reconstruct stories like the one we have been following tonight. They piece together the daily rhythms of lives lived thousands of years ago. They recover the voices of people speaking to their gods, blessing their children, negotiating with darkness, hoping for dawn. It is a strange kind of immortality, not the one the Mesopotamians hoped for. They wanted to be remembered by name, to have their descendants speak their names in offerings, to maintain presence through direct lineage. Instead, they are remembered anonymously, as exemplars of a culture, as representatives of ancient humanity, their individual names lost but their common experiences somehow preserved. We don't know the real name of the family we've been imagining tonight, but we know the shapes of their lives, the contours of their concerns, the textures of their daily existence. And perhaps there is a lesson in this too. The particulars fade, the specific names, the individual faces, the unique details of each singular life. But the patterns persist. Parents have always worried about sick children. Merchants have always stressed about business deals. Old people have always died surrounded by family. People have always sought protection against the dangers of the dark. People have always created rituals to manage the transitions between waking and sleeping, between day and night, between life and death. These are not Mesopotamian concerns but human concerns, not ancient anxieties but eternal ones. In reading about how the people of Ur prepared for sleep 4,000 years ago, we are really reading about ourselves, about the persistent human need to create meaning and order, to establish connection with something larger than ourselves, to care for those we love, to find ways of managing vulnerability and fear. The oil lamps of ancient Mesopotamia are gone, but we still light our own lights against the darkness, even if they now run on electricity rather than sesame oil. The specific demons they feared may no longer haunt our imagination, but we have our own anxieties that disturb our sleep. The gods they prayed to no longer command worship, but most humans still reach towards something transcendent, still seek sources of comfort and meaning beyond the purely material. The bedtime rituals of Mesopotamia are therefore not just historical curiosities but windows into the ongoing human project of making life livable, of finding ways to rest despite the awareness of danger, of trusting that morning will come even when night seems very dark. They remind us that our ancestors were not so different from us, that they felt what we feel, that they faced their world with courage and creativity and love, just as we try to do. And so we honor them by telling their stories, by attempting to understand their lives, by recognizing in their ancient practices something that still speaks to us across the vast gulf of time. We sit here in our own present moment, in our own homes, preparing for our own sleep, and we connect backward through the generations to all those who came before, who also sought rest, who also hoped for protection, who also blessed their children and said their prayers and surrendered themselves to the darkness, trusting in dawn's return. In the house of Unwind, as the day progresses, life continues in its ordinary rhythms. The children return home from their various activities, hungry and full of stories about their day. Neen Shubber prepares the evening meal, much as she did yesterday and will do tomorrow. The grandmother continues her spinning, the thread growing longer and longer under her practiced fingers. Unwind returns from the marketplace, his copper deal finally concluded, satisfied with the terms he managed to negotiate. As evening approaches once again, as the sun begins its familiar descent toward the western horizon, the family begins to anticipate the rituals that will come. There is something comforting in this anticipation, in knowing what comes next, in the reliable structure that shapes each day. The children know they will be washed and blessed before sleep. The parents know they will make their offerings and say their prayers. The grandmother knows she will check on each child through the night, keeping her watch as she has done for decades now. These rituals are not a burden but a gift, not an obligation grudgingly fulfilled but a practice willingly embraced. They provide the scaffolding on which life is built, the repetitive structure that allows for stability and security. Without them, each night would be a new negotiation with chaos, each bedtime a fresh improvisation. With them, there is a path to follow, worn smooth by countless footsteps, leading safely from day into night and back again. As the lamp flames flicker in the courtyard and the family gathers for their evening meal, as the sounds of the city gradually quiet and the moon begins its ascent into the darkening sky, the ancient patterns reassert themselves once more. The cycle continues. The rituals are performed. The prayers are spoken. The offerings are made. Another day passes into night, and another night will pass into day, and the rhythm continues, has always continued, will always continue, as long as humans draw breath and seek rest and wake to greet the dawn. In the wider world beyond the walls of Ur, beyond the borders of the Mesopotamian plain, other peoples are also settling into their own evening rituals, shaped by their own cultures and beliefs but serving the same fundamental purposes. In Egypt, families are making their own offerings to their own gods, speaking their own protective formulas. In the Indus Valley, in China, in the Americas, wherever humans have gathered into communities, they are creating their own ways of managing the transition from day to night, of protecting themselves through the vulnerable hours of darkness, of ensuring that they will wake to see another morning. All of these rituals, in all of these different places, are expressions of the same basic human drives, the need for safety, the desire for meaning, the longing for connection with something transcendent, the commitment to caring for those we love. The specific forms vary infinitely, but the underlying concerns are universal. This is what it means to be human. To be aware of our vulnerability, to fear what might harm us, but to create nevertheless structures of meaning and protection, to build communities of mutual care, to tell stories that give shape to our experience, to perform rituals that connect us to our ancestors and to whatever we understand as sacred. The bedtime rituals of ancient Mesopotamia are one small thread in the vast tapestry of human cultural creation, one example among thousands of how people have attempted to navigate the basic challenges of existence. But they are a beautiful example, rich and complex, revealing tremendous sophistication in their understanding of human psychological needs and of how ritual can serve those needs. The people who performed these rituals were not primitive or superstitious in any dismissive sense. They were thoughtful, creative, deeply cultured people attempting to live well in a difficult world, using the best tools and knowledge available to them. As we come toward the end of our journey through this ancient evening, as we prepare to release these long-dead people back into the silence from which we briefly summoned them, it seems worth reflecting on what we might take with us from this encounter with the past. Not specific practices to adopt. We cannot and should not try to recreate the exact rituals of another culture from another time. But perhaps we can take with us a greater awareness of the value of ritual itself, of the importance of marking transitions, of the power of communal practice to create meaning and connection. Perhaps we can reclaim some sense of sleep as a meaningful passage rather than dead time, as a nightly journey that deserves its own preparation and attention. Perhaps we can recover some of the care and deliberation with which the Mesopotamians approached bedtime, their recognition that how we enter sleep matters, that the transition from waking to sleeping is significant and should not be rushed or taken for granted. Perhaps we can learn from their communal approach, their understanding that bedtime rituals are not just individual practices but family and community activities, ways of reinforcing bonds and expressing care. Perhaps we can see in their protective rituals not mere superstition but a profound recognition of vulnerability and an admirable determination to do whatever possible to protect those we love. Perhaps most of all, we can take with us a renewed appreciation for the common humanity we share with all people across all times and places. The specific circumstances of our lives may be utterly different from those of a Mesopotamian family 4,000 years ago. We face different dangers, worship different gods or no gods at all, organize our societies differently, possess different technologies and knowledge. But at the most basic level, we are not so different. We love our children as they loved theirs. We worry about our livelihoods as they worried about theirs. We seek rest and hope for protection and trust in dawn's return, just as they did. This common humanity, this recognition that we are all part of one long human story stretching from the deep past into the unknowable future, is perhaps the most valuable gift that history can give us. It allows us to see ourselves in a larger context, to recognize that we are links in a chain, inheritors of wisdom and practice accumulated over millennia, participants in an ongoing project of human flourishing that will continue long after we ourselves have become ancestors, have become stories, have become artifacts for future archaeologists to puzzle over. And with this recognition comes both humility and empowerment. Humility because we see how small and temporary our own individual lives are in the vast sweep of human history, how our most pressing concerns will eventually seem as remote and strange to future people as the concerns of ancient Mesopotamia seem to us now. But also empowerment because we see that we are part of something larger and more enduring than ourselves, that we contribute to and carry forward traditions and practices that stretch back to the very beginning of human culture, that the rituals we perform and the meanings we create add to the accumulated wisdom of our species. In this sense, every time we mark a transition with care, every time we create a ritual to bring meaning to experience, every time we gather with family or community to perform shared practices, we are continuing the work that began thousands of years ago in places like you are, the work of being human, of creating culture, of building islands of meaning and order in the vast sea of chaos that surrounds us. The sun has set once more in our imagination, if not in the external world where you, dear listener, are hearing these words. The family of Uarnama has performed its evening rituals and settled into sleep. The city of Uar is quiet beneath the stars. The moon continues its journey across the sky. And we, having accompanied these ancient people through their evening and night, having witnessed their careful preparations for sleep, their prayers and offerings, their fears and hopes, their dreams and vigils, we too can now consider our own rest. For whether you are listening to these words in darkness, preparing for your own sleep, or in daylight, using this narration simply as accompaniment to other activities, the invitation is the same. To slow down, to breathe deeply, to allow the urgency of daily concerns to recede, to find some measure of peace. The specific rituals of ancient Mesopotamia may not be ours to claim, but the underlying wisdom they represent is available to all. The wisdom that says transitions matter. That rest is sacred. That protection must be sought. That meaning must be created. That love must be expressed. That dawn will come again. So as we take our leave of Nama and Ninshubur, of their children and their grandmother, of the king in his palace and the baker in his shop, of the mother keeping vigil beside her sick daughter and the family mourning their dead father, of all these people who once lived and breathed and worried and hoped just as we do, we carry with us their gift. The reminder that we are not alone, that we are part of a long chain of humans who have faced the darkness and created light, who have known vulnerability and built protection, who have experienced chaos and established order. We are not alone in our struggles or our fears. We are not the first to lie awake at night worrying about what tomorrow might bring. We are not the first to seek comfort in ritual and prayer in connection with something larger than ourselves. We are not the first to love and hope and work and rest and wake to try again. All of this has been done before, is being done now by others across the world, will be done again by those who come after us. And there is comfort in this knowledge, comfort in being part of this long human story, comfort in recognizing that the challenges we face, while real and immediate to us, are also ancient and universal, that others have faced them before and found ways to endure, to persist, to create beauty and meaning even in difficult circumstances. The people of ancient UR could not prevent the eventual collapse of their empire. They could not stop the wheel of history from turning. But they could create households of love and order. They could perform their rituals with care and devotion. They could tell their children stories. They could remember their ancestors. They could offer their prayers to the gods they believed in. They could light lamps against the darkness. They could bless and protect and nurture. They could rest in the trust that they had done what they could, that they had fulfilled their responsibilities to the best of their ability, that the rest was in hands larger than their own. And perhaps this is enough. Perhaps this is all any of us can do. To tend carefully to the small circles of influence we possess, to perform with devotion whatever rituals and practices give structure and meaning to our lives, to care for those we love, to contribute what we can to the larger communities of which we are part, to face uncertainty with courage and darkness with hope, to rest when we need rest and wake when it is time to wake and trust that this is sufficient, that this is enough, that this is what it means to live well in a world we cannot fully control. So let us rest now, as the people of ancient UR rested, as humans have always rested, surrendering for a time the burden of consciousness, allowing the body to do its work of healing and restoration, allowing the mind to wander through whatever dreams come, trusting in the protection of whatever we hold sacred, whether that be gods or love or simply the reliable rhythms of nature that ensure night follows day and day follows night in eternal cycle. Let us rest in the knowledge that we have done what we can, that tomorrow we will wake and try again, that we are part of something larger and more enduring than our individual selves. Let us rest in gratitude for those who came before us, who built the world we inherited, who developed the wisdom and practices we now benefit from. Let us rest in hope for those who will come after us, who will inherit what we leave behind, who will tell their own stories about us just as we have told stories about those who preceded us. Let us rest, finally, in peace. Not the peace of absolute certainty or perfect safety, that was never available even to the gods themselves in the Mesopotamian worldview. But the peace of having done our best, of having attended to what matters, of having loved and created and contributed according to our ability. The peace of accepting our own limitations, our own mortality, our own small place in the vast scheme of things, and finding that this is enough, that this has always been enough, that this will always be enough. The lamp flames flicker and fade. The moon continues its ancient journey across the sky. The stars will overhead in their eternal dance. The earth turns on its axis, carrying us from light into darkness and back into light again. The rhythm continues, as it has for billions of years, as it will for billions more, long after humans and their stories and their rituals have vanished into the past. But for now, in this moment, we are here. We are alive. We have this night and the promise of tomorrow. We have our own lamps to light, our own prayers to speak, our own loved ones to bless and protect. We have our own rituals to create and maintain, our own meanings to establish, our own small stands against chaos to make. And in making them, in performing whatever evening observances bring us comfort and meaning, in preparing ourselves for sleep with whatever care we can muster, we join hands across time with all those who have done the same, from the people of ancient UR to our own parents and grandparents to people across the world tonight, all of us participating in the same basic human project, all of us seeking the same things: safety, meaning, connection, rest. So sleep well, dear listener, whether sleep comes now or later. Sleep well, knowing you are part of this long chain. Sleep well, trusting that dawn will come. Sleep well, secure in whatever protection you can provide for yourself and those you love. Sleep well, and dream whatever dreams will come, and know that morning awaits, and with it another chance to live, to love, to create meaning, to tend the small gardens of order we plant in the wilderness of chaos. The story of Mesopotamian bedtime rituals is finished, but the story of human bedtime rituals continues. It continues in every home where lamps are lit and children are blessed. It continues in every prayer spoken and every offering made. It continues in every conscious effort to mark the transition from day to night, to acknowledge vulnerability while asserting hope, to surrender to sleep while trusting in waking. It continues in you, as you take whatever you need from this ancient story, as you find whatever resonance it has with your own life, as you perhaps create your own rituals or renew your commitment to existing ones, as you attend with greater care to the significant passage from waking into sleeping that you make every single night of your life. The people of UR are gone, but their wisdom remains. The lamps they lit have been dark for thousands of years, but we can light our own. The prayers they spoke are no longer offered to their gods, but we can speak our own prayers to whatever we hold sacred. The children they blessed grew up and grew old and died and turned to dust millennia ago, but we can bless our own children or simply bless ourselves, offering care and protection and hope into the darkness. And in doing so, we ensure that the project continues, that the wisdom accumulates, that the chain remains unbroken, that humans continue to face the darkness with courage and creativity and love, continue to create rituals and meanings and communities, continue to rest and wake and try again, continue to live in the face of death, continue to hope in the face of uncertainty, continue to love in the face of loss. This is what the people of ancient Mesopotamia teach us through their bedtime rituals. Not specific incantations to memorize or gods to worship, but the underlying commitment to care, to attention, to ritual, to meaning-making, to community, to protection of the vulnerable, to trust in cyclical return, to peace in the face of uncertainty. This is their gift to us across the millennia. This is what they whisper to us from their vanished world. That it is worth the effort, that the rituals matter, that love is powerful, that meaning can be created, that darkness can be faced, that rest can be achieved, that dawn will come. Listen to their ancient voices speaking these truths. Feel the weight of 4,000 years of human experience telling you that you are not alone, that others have walked this path, that the way forward is known even when it seems obscure. Trust in the wisdom they accumulated through countless nights of vigilant care. Accept their gift of ritual knowledge, of communal practice, of carefully structured transitions between waking and sleeping. And now, with this gift received and acknowledged, with these stories told and heard, with this journey through an ancient evening completed, it is time to return fully to your own present moment, your own life, your own evening or day, your own preparations for whatever rest you seek. May your lamps burn steadily through the night. May your prayers, if you speak them, be heard by whatever powers you believe in. May those you love be protected and blessed. May your sleep, when it comes, be deep and restorative. May your dreams, if you remember them, bring insight or at least entertainment. May the demons of ancient imagination trouble you not at all, but may the underlying concerns they represented be addressed with care and wisdom. May the gods of old, or the principles they embodied, look upon you with favor. May the cycle continue for you as it has for countless others, night following day, sleep following waking, rest following labor, restoration following depletion. May you wait to see another morning, another chance, another day in the long story of your life. May you find, as the people of ancient you are found, ways to create meaning and beauty even in difficult circumstances. May you build your own small islands of order and love in the chaos. May you light your own lamps and speak your own blessings and perform your own rituals with devotion and care. May you rest well, knowing you are part of this ancient human family, this long chain of souls stretching backward into the forgotten past and forward into the unknown future. May you sleep in peace, and wake in hope, and live with purpose, for as long as life is granted to you. And when your own time comes to join the ancestors, as it will for all of us, may you be remembered with love, as we now remember the unnamed families of ancient you are. May your life have mattered. May your love have been felt. May your contributions, however small, have added to the accumulated wisdom and beauty of the human project. May you become part of the long story, as the people of you are have become part of our story tonight. This is my wish for you, dear listener, as we conclude this journey together through an ancient evening in Mesopotamia. This is my blessing upon you as you return to your own time and place. This is my prayer for you as I take my leave. Sleep well. Rest deeply. Dream sweetly. Wake refreshed. Live fully. Love generously. Create meaningfully. Contribute faithfully. And know always that you are part of something larger, something ancient, something enduring, something beautiful. The long human story of facing darkness with courage, of seeking rest with care, of trusting that dawn will come again. Good night, traveler. Thank you for making this journey with me. Thank you for spending this time with the people of ancient you are. Thank you for carrying their wisdom forward into your own life. Thank you for being part of the long chain. The lamps are burning low now. The night has grown deep and quiet. The stories have been told. The rituals have been honored. It is time, at last, to rest. Sleep well, dear friend. Sleep well.